Welcome to this quiet hour we share together. Before we begin our journey tonight, I invite you to settle deeper into wherever you find yourself. Adjust your headphones, if you will, let them rest gently against your ears. Pull your blankets a little higher. Feel the weight of them. Notice how the world outside, with all its demands, its noise, its relentless forward motion, begins to fade, just a little, as you turn your attention here, to this voice, to this story, to this sanctuary we're building together in the dark. Tonight, we're going to step back through time. Not with a jolt, not with any sudden leap, but slowly, deliberately, as if walking through a doorway draped in heavy velvet curtains, parting them gently with our fingertips, feeling the cool fabric brush against our skin as we move from the bright, frantic present, into the shrouded, mysterious past. We're traveling to London. But not the London you might imagine from photographs or films. Not the London of monuments bathed in sunlight or streets bustling with color. No. We're going to the London that existed in the autumn of 1888. A London wrapped in fog so thick it seemed less like weather and more like a living presence. A London where the air itself had texture, had weight, had secrets pressed into every particle of moisture that hung suspended between the gas lamps and the cobblestones below. Close your eyes now, if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow. Feel your chest rise, and fall, in a rhythm as old as time itself. Are you ready? Then let us begin. Imagine, if you will, that you're standing on a street corner in London's East End on a November evening in the year 1888. The first thing you notice, before sight, before sound, is the smell. It comes to you in layers, each one distinct, each one telling its own small story about this vast, ancient city. First, there's coal smoke. Not the clean, almost sweet smell of wood burning in a hearth, but something heavier, more industrial, more penetrating. It's the scent of thousands upon thousands of chimneys exhaling at once, their breath mingling in the air above the rooftops, creating that peculiar yellowish-brown fog Londoners called pea-soupers. The smoke clings to your clothes, settles in your hair, coats the back of your throat with a faint metallic taste. Beneath the coal smoke, you catch hints of other things. The damp wool of coats worn too long between washings. The sharp, almost vinegar-like tang of tanneries and dye works. The yeasty warmth drifting from the doorway of a public house. Horse manure, wet stone, the faint corruption of the Thames carried on an easterly wind. And underneath it all, something you can't quite name, something old and organic and somehow alive, as if the city itself were breathing, sweating, dreaming in its sleep. The fog presses close around you. Not like a curtain you could simply push aside, but like something with substance, with presence. It softens every edge, blurs every boundary. Buildings rise out of the mist like ships emerging from a gray sea, their details obscured, their true shapes unknowable until you're nearly close enough to touch them. The fog transforms the familiar into the strange, the known into the mysterious. In this fog, you could be anywhere, or nowhere at all. You're standing in what they call a liminal space now, a threshold, an in-between place where the ordinary rules seem suspended. Day hasn't quite surrendered to night. The Victorian afternoon, with its routines and its certainties, is dissolving into something else entirely. The gas lamps have been lit, but they don't illuminate so much as they create small islands of dim yellow light in an ocean of gray. Their glow barely reaches beyond the lamp posts themselves, and instead of bringing comfort, they somehow emphasize the darkness beyond, the vast stretches of shadow where the lamplight cannot reach. Listen. The sounds of this city are muffled by the fog, arriving to your ears as if from a great distance. Somewhere, perhaps on the next street, perhaps miles away, it's impossible to tell, you hear footsteps. The rhythmic tap, tap, tap of boot heels on wet cobblestones. They have a particular sound, these footsteps, a hollow echo that seems to carry some unnamed urgency, some purpose you cannot divine. They grow louder, louder, and then fade again, swallowed by the fog, as if whoever made them has walked not just out of earshot but out of existence entirely. A horse whinnies, the sound plaintive and somehow very alone. The creak of a cart's wheels. The distant clang of a church bell marking the hour, though which hour you cannot quite remember. Was it 5? 6? Time itself seems uncertain here, negotiable, as fluid as the fog that surrounds you. Victorian London in the autumn of 1888 was a city of contrasts so extreme they seemed almost impossible. To the west, in Mayfair and Belgravia, gas chandeliers blazed in drawing rooms where men in evening clothes discussed philosophy and ladies in silk gowns bent their heads over embroidery. There were theaters with red velvet seats, restaurants serving oysters and champagne, shops with windows full of things most people would never be able to afford, things that existed purely to be beautiful, purely to be desired. But here in the East End, in districts like Whitechapel and Spitalfields, the city wore a different face entirely. This was where London worked. Where it labored. Where it struggled and survived and sometimes failed to survive. The buildings leaned close together, timber and brick structures centuries old, their windows small and dark, their doorways narrow. The streets were a labyrinth of narrow lanes and courts, alleyways that twisted back on themselves, dead ends where the fog pooled thick as cream. At night, the East End became something else. The factories and workshops that provided the district's heartbeat during daylight hours fell silent. The crowds that packed the streets at midday thinned to scattered figures moving quickly, purposefully, their faces hidden, their destinations unknown. Doors closed. Windows shuttered. And in the spaces between the gas lamps, in the shadows that stretched and pooled like spilled ink, the city's secrets gathered. Because London, this ancient city built on Roman foundations, grown wild and dense over centuries, had secrets. Layer upon layer of them. Stories pressed into its stones, whispered in its alleyways, buried in its graveyards, floating on its river. It was a city where the past and present existed simultaneously, where you could turn a corner and find yourself in a street that looked exactly as it had 200 years before, where the weight of history was something you could almost feel pressing down on your shoulders. And in the autumn of 1888, that weight felt heavier than ever. The year had been strange. That's the word people would use, later, when they looked back. Strange. Unsettled. As if something fundamental had shifted in the city's foundations, some invisible fault line that no one could quite identify but everyone could feel. The summer had been unusually cold, the autumn unusually foggy. The newspapers were full of troubling stories, riots in Trafalgar Square, strikes in the docks, a sense that the old certainties were crumbling, that the empire's confidence was perhaps not as unshakable as everyone had always believed. There was a restlessness in the air, a feeling that change was coming, though no one could say what form it might take. And then, in late August, something happened that would transform Whitechapel from an obscure corner of London's vast sprawl into a name known around the world. But we're not quite there yet. Not yet. Tonight, we're going to walk through the district as it was in those final quiet weeks before everything changed. We're going to feel the texture of those streets, breathe that fog-thick air, listen to the sounds that echoed through those narrow lanes. We're going to understand what Whitechapel was, really was, before it became fixed forever in the public imagination as the theater for acts so dark they seemed almost medieval in their brutality. So take another breath. Let it out slowly. We're standing now at the edge of Whitechapel High Street as evening deepens into night. The fog has grown thicker in just the past few minutes, as if it's been waiting for darkness to reveal its full power. The gas lamps create their small islands of sickly yellow light, but the spaces between them seem to have grown vast, unnavigable, almost infinite. The high street itself is still relatively busy, omnibuses rolling past with their passengers huddled inside, a few hansom cabs, pedestrians moving with heads down and collars up. But just behind you, just a few steps away, the side streets branch off into that labyrinth we spoke of. Commercial Street, Flower and Dean Street, Dorset Street, Fashion Street. Names that sound almost quaint now, almost charming. But in 1888, these names meant something different. They meant poverty. They meant danger. They meant the places where respectable people did not go after dark. Let's walk down one of these streets together now. Slowly. Carefully. Feeling our way forward through the fog. The cobblestones beneath our feet are uneven, worn smooth in some places, broken and crumbling in others. We can hear them, these stones, each footstep producing that distinctive hollow sound. There's water somewhere, perhaps a broken gutter, perhaps just the perpetual dampness that seems to rise from the ground itself in this district. It trickles with a soft, steady murmur, like a voice telling secrets just below the threshold of understanding. The buildings press close on either side. We can reach out and touch them if we want, feel the rough brick, the damp plaster, the occasional smooth panel of wood. There are windows above us, their panes catching the faint reflected glow of distant lamps, but most are dark. Behind them, families are crowded into single rooms, sometimes entire families in a space no larger than a modern closet. But we can't see any of this. The fog keeps their secrets, as it keeps all secrets. We're in Whitechapel now. Really in it. And it's quiet. Eerily quiet. The sounds of the high street have faded behind us as if they were miles away rather than just yards. Our own footsteps seem too loud, almost intrusive. And there's that feeling again, that sense of liminality, of being between things, of occupying a space that exists somehow outside the normal rules of time and place. This is the London nobody knew. The London that existed in the shadows, in the spaces between the gaslights, in the hours when respectable people were safe at home. This is the London where our story begins. And somewhere in this fog, in this labyrinth of ancient streets, something is about to emerge from the darkness. Something that will transform these quiet lanes into a stage for mystery and horror that will echo down through the centuries. But tonight, right now, there is only the fog. The slow drip of water on stone. The distant, muffled sounds of a city settling into its evening rhythms. And the feeling, impossible to shake, impossible to name, that we are being watched. By the city itself, perhaps. Or by something else. The city breathes differently in the hours before dawn. There is a particular quality to this time, a depth to the darkness, a weight to the silence, that exists nowhere else in the cycle of day and night. The French have a phrase for it, l'heure du loup. The hour of the wolf. That stretch of time between roughly 3 and 4 in the morning when the human spirit is at its lowest ebb, when sleep is deepest or most elusive, when the boundary between the waking world and the realm of dreams becomes thin as mist. In London, in the East End, in the fog-wrapped streets of Whitechapel, this hour takes on an almost physical presence. The last of the late revelers have stumbled home hours ago. The early morning workers have not yet begun to stir. Even the criminals and the desperate, those who haunt these streets when darkness falls, have mostly retreated to whatever holes and corners they call home. What remains is a silence so profound it seems almost sacred, as if the city itself has finally been granted permission to rest, to lower its guard, to dream. It is August 31st, 1888. A Friday morning. The clock hands are approaching 3:40. And the fog has reached its absolute zenith. It hangs in the air like something solid, like a gray curtain suspended between earth and sky. If you were to reach out your hand in this darkness, in this fog, you would not be able to see your own fingers. The world has contracted to the few feet immediately around you. Everything else has ceased to exist, or seems to have ceased to exist. The temperature has dropped. Not dramatically, this is not winter, after all, but enough that the damp air carries a genuine chill now, penetrating through wool and cotton, finding its way to skin and bone. When you exhale, your breath joins the fog, becomes indistinguishable from it. You are, in a sense, breathing the same air as the city, sharing its exhalations, participating in its slow, steady respiration. The silence is not complete, of course. Nothing is ever completely silent in a city of 4 million souls. But the sounds that do exist seem to come from very far away, or from another world entirely. The Thames, somewhere to the south, murmurs its endless monologue. A dog barks once, twice, then falls silent. Water drips from a broken downspout with metronomic precision, marking time in the darkness. And beneath it all, if you listen very carefully, there's a sound that might be your own heartbeat or might be something else entirely, a kind of low, barely audible hum that seems to rise from the stones themselves, as if the city were singing to itself in its sleep. This is the hour when rational people are home, are safe, are unconscious in their beds. The people moving through these streets at this hour are doing so out of necessity, not choice. They are the shift workers bound for the docks or the markets. They are the bakers who must have their bread ready before the city wakes. They are the desperate and the displaced, those who have no bed to return to, who walk through the night because walking is warmer than standing still, because motion feels safer than stillness. And it is into this profound, fog-shrouded darkness that we now descend, following a single street deeper into the labyrinth of Whitechapel. A street called Buck's Row. Buck's Row is not a wide street. It is not a grand street. It is, in fact, the kind of street you might walk past 100 times without ever really noticing it, the kind of place that exists in the margins of a city's consciousness, serving its humble function without calling attention to itself. It runs east to west, a narrow passage connecting Brady Street to Baker's Row, barely 200 yards from end to end. But tonight, this morning, Buck's Row is about to become something else entirely. A name. A landmark. A place that will be remembered, studied, discussed, and analyzed for generations to come. Stand at the eastern end of Buck's Row for a moment. Let your eyes adjust to what little light exists here. The street is lined on one side by the high, blank wall of a warehouse, brown stable yard, where horses sleep in their stalls, their warm bodies creating small islands of heat in the cold morning air. The wall is brick, old brick, dark even in daylight and now nearly invisible in the fog. It rises perhaps 12 feet high, creating a canyon of shadow. On the other side of the street stands a school, Essex Wharf Board School, its windows dark, its classrooms empty and waiting for the children who will fill them in just a few hours. Beyond the school, a row of terraced houses, their residents asleep behind closed doors, unaware that they are witnesses to history in the making, though they will not know it until the light comes. The cobblestones here are particularly uneven. Centuries of cart wheels and horse hooves and human feet have worn them into a pattern of valleys and ridges. Puddles gather in the low spots, reflecting nothing in this absolute darkness. The fog seems to pool here, trapped between the high walls and the low sky, growing denser and more impenetrable with each passing moment. There are no gas lamps on Bucks Row. Not one. The nearest light is back on Brady Street, a pale yellow smudge in the distance, visible only if you know exactly where to look. Here, in the middle of the street, the darkness is so complete it feels almost liquid, as if you could reach out and touch it, as if you could gather it in your hands. This is a lonely place. A forgotten place. The kind of place where things can happen unseen, where secrets can be kept, where the shadows are deep enough to hide almost anything. And it is here, in this precise location, that the silence is about to be broken. Footsteps. They come from the east, from Brady Street. Slow, steady footsteps, the sound of a working man walking to his job in the early morning darkness. The rhythm is unhurried but purposeful. This is someone who has made this walk many times before, someone who knows these streets even in the fog, someone whose feet find the path by memory rather than sight. His name is Charles Cross, though he sometimes goes by Charles Lechmere. He is a carman, a cart driver, and he is walking to Pickford's depot where his shift will begin soon. He wears a rough woolen coat against the chill. His hands are thrust deep into his pockets. His head is down, watching the cobblestones just in front of his feet, trusting them to guide him forward. The fog wraps around him like a cloak. He can barely see more than a few feet in any direction. The high warehouse wall to his left is more felt than seen, a presence, a solidity in the mist. His footsteps echo softly, absorbed by the fog almost as soon as they're made. He is thinking, perhaps, of the day ahead. Of the loads he will carry. Of the wages he will earn. Of the small, ordinary concerns that fill the minds of working men at 4 in the morning. And then he sees something. At first, he's not sure what he's seeing. The darkness is so complete, the fog so thick, that shapes are deceptive. There, on the pavement, on the south side of the street, near the entrance to Brown's stable yard, something dark. Something that shouldn't be there. His first thought is that it might be a tarpaulin, perhaps fallen from a cart. Or a pile of discarded fabric. This is the East End, after all. Things are abandoned on streets constantly, old clothes, broken furniture, refuse of all kinds. But something makes him slow his steps. Some instinct, some small voice in the back of his mind suggesting that this shape is wrong somehow. Out of place. He moves closer, cautiously, his boots making soft sounds on the wet cobblestones. The fog swirls around him with his movement. And then he hears it. Other footsteps. Coming from behind him, from the same direction he's just come. Growing louder. Coming closer. The footsteps belong to Robert Paul, another carman, another working man bound for the same depot. He too has noticed nothing unusual yet. He is simply walking, head down, focused on getting to work on time, on beginning another long day of labor that will exhaust his body and barely fill his pockets. But then he sees Charles Cross, standing there in the street, stopped near something on the ground. And Cross turns toward him, a darker shape in the darkness, and his voice carries through the fog, quiet, uncertain, strange. "Come and look over here," Cross says. Or something like it. The exact words will be debated later, remembered differently, filtered through shock and time. There's a woman. Paul approaches. The two men stand together now, looking down at what lies on the pavement. They can barely see it. The darkness is too complete. But there is definitely a shape there. A form. Human-sized. Paul reaches down, his hand finding fabric. A skirt. Cold to the touch. Damp with fog and something else. He touches what might be a hand. It too is cold. Very cold. Cold in a way that is not simply the chill of the morning air. "I think she's dead," Paul says. His voice is flat, matter of fact, but there's something underneath it. Something that might be fear or might be the first stirrings of horror, though he doesn't yet understand why he should be horrified. The two men stand there for a moment that stretches, that becomes elastic, that seems to exist outside of normal time. This is a liminal moment, a threshold. On one side of it is the world as they understood it, hard, cold, brutal perhaps, but comprehensible. On the other side is something else. Something that will reshape how they think about these streets, about this city, about the nature of darkness itself. They are working men, not doctors or police. They cannot see clearly in this fog, in this darkness. They do not know, cannot know, exactly what has happened here. But they know that something is terribly, fundamentally wrong. The cold of the body. The absolute stillness. The way the fog seems to press closer now, as if the city itself is leaning in to look. "We should find a policeman," Cross says finally. Paul nods. They back away from the shape on the ground. They do not run, working men do not run unless there is immediate danger, but they walk quickly now, their footsteps faster, less steady than before. They need authority. They need someone who will know what to do. They need, in some fundamental way, to transfer the responsibility of this discovery to someone else, to lift this weight from their own shoulders. Behind them, the shape on the pavement remains motionless. The fog continues to fall. The silence, briefly disturbed, settles back over Buck's Row like a blanket, like a shroud. The city dreams on, unaware that something has changed. That a line has been crossed. That the autumn of 1888 has just become something history will never forget. Police Constable John Neal is walking his beat. He has been a policeman for many years. He knows these streets as well as anyone alive. He walks with the measured pace of authority, his boots striking the cobblestones in a steady rhythm that announces his presence, that provides comfort to law-abiding citizens and warning to those with less honest intentions. He carries a lantern. Its light is not bright, oil lanterns never are, but in this absolute darkness, it seems almost miraculous. The beam cuts through the fog, creating a small tunnel of visibility, a moving sphere of pale yellow illumination that travels with him as he walks. Objects emerge from the darkness as he approaches, a doorway, a lamp post, a pile of crates, and then fade back into obscurity as he passes. He has just turned into Buck's Row from the western end. It is approximately 3:45 in the morning. In 15 minutes, his shift will end. He is thinking, perhaps, of going home. Of a cup of hot tea. Of whatever modest comfort awaits him. But then his lantern beam finds something it should not find. There, on the south side of the street, lying on the pavement in front of the warehouse gates. A figure. A person. His first thought mirrors that of the two carmen before him, drunk, perhaps. Someone who has collapsed on their way home from a pub. It happens. Not unusual. Part of the job. He approaches, the lantern swinging in his hand, its light dancing across the cobblestones, across the walls, across the still form on the ground. Get up, he might call out. A standard opening. Firm but not unkind. No response. No movement. Closer now. The lantern light falls fully on the figure, and Neil sees what Cross and Paul could not see in their darkness. He sees the position of the body. The arrangement of clothing. And he sees something else. Something that makes him stop, makes him freeze for just a moment before training takes over. He does not touch the body. He understands immediately that this is not drunk. This is not collapsed. This is something else entirely. He raises his lantern higher, looking around, suddenly aware of the darkness pressing in from all sides, of the thousand places someone could hide in these shadows. But there is nothing. No sound but his own breathing. No movement but the fog. He signals with his lantern, a practiced gesture, swinging it back and forth. The light arcs through the fog, creating brief, sweeping illuminations. This is how the police communicate in the darkness, with light, with movement, with signals that other constables will recognize. And they come. Other policemen, drawn by the swinging lantern. Their footsteps echo through the empty street. Their own lanterns appear in the fog like distant stars, growing brighter as they approach. Voices now, low and urgent, trying to understand, trying to process what they're seeing. More lanterns. More voices. The quiet of Buck's Row, the profound silence of the hour of the wolf, has been shattered now. Authority has arrived. The mechanisms of law and order have begun to turn. Soon there will be doctors. Detectives. Reporters. Crowds. The machinery of investigation will grind into motion, will not stop for weeks, for months. But in this moment, in the swinging light of the lanterns, in the muffled voices of the constables, there is still something dreamlike about it all. Something unreal. As if this cannot possibly be happening, as if the fog will lift and they will all wake up and discover that this was nothing but a nightmare born of too much cheese before bed, too little sleep, too many ghost stories told by firelight. But the fog does not lift. And this is no nightmare. This is Buck's Row. This is Whitechapel. This is the fog of 1888. And something has emerged from the shadows that will never be entirely banished back into them. Something that will haunt these streets, this city, this collective memory, for generations yet to come. The fog, which has been merely weather, merely an atmospheric condition, a function of coal smoke and Thames moisture and autumn temperatures, has become something else now. It has become a veil. A curtain. A presence that both reveals and conceals, that transforms the familiar into the strange, that makes the real world seem like a stage set for mysteries too dark to fully comprehend. In the hours to come, as dawn breaks and the city wakes, as the news spreads through the streets like water flowing downhill, people will begin to understand that something has changed. That the autumn of 1888 is not like other autumns. That Whitechapel is not simply another poor district in an enormous city, but has become the center of something vast and terrible and utterly incomprehensible. But we are not there yet. Not quite. For now, there is only the fog. The lantern light. The muffled voices. The slow realization dawning on the men gathered in Buck's Row that the silence has been broken in a way that cannot be mended. The city will not sleep peacefully again for a very long time. And the fog will remember everything. There is a quality of light that exists only in fog-bound cities. It is not darkness, exactly, and it is certainly not light in any true sense. It is something in between, a kind of luminous grayness that seeps into the world so gradually you cannot quite say when night ended and day began. The transition is so subtle, so gentle, that it feels less like sunrise and more like the world slowly remembering itself, piece by piece, emerging from a dream. This is the light that comes to Whitechapel on the morning of August 31, 1888. A Friday morning. The hour is approaching 5 o'clock, then 5:30, then 6. The fog has not lifted, will not lift for hours yet, but it has changed. The absolute blackness of the hour of the wolf has given way to this strange, oppressive gray. A gray that seems to have texture, to have weight, to press down on the city like a heavy blanket that cannot be thrown off. If you look up, if you tilt your head back and try to find the sky, you will see only more grayness, layered upon itself, receding upward into infinity. There is no sun visible. No bright disk burning through the murk. Only the vague sense that somewhere, far above this fog-wrapped city, daylight exists. But it cannot reach here. Cannot penetrate. The light that does arrive comes filtered through thousands of feet of suspended coal smoke and Thames moisture, arriving weak and defeated, barely enough to see by, certainly not enough to warm by. The temperature has not risen. If anything, the morning feels colder than the deep night did. The damp has settled into everything, into the bricks of the buildings, into the cobblestones of the streets, into the wool and cotton and leather of clothing, into skin and bone. It is the kind of cold that makes joints ache, that makes breathing feel laborious, that reminds you of your own mortality in small, insistent ways. But the city is waking. Slowly. Reluctantly. But waking nonetheless. Listen. The first sound is the bells. Church bells, tolling the hour from St. Mary Matfelon, Whitechapel Church, the parish church, whose white stone exterior gave the district its name centuries ago. The bells ring out through the fog, their sound muffled but persistent, marking 6 o'clock in the morning. The tones are deep and resonant, vibrating through the gray air, announcing to the faithful and the faithless alike that a new day has technically begun, whether anyone is ready for it or not. Other bells answer from other churches, St. Jude's, Christ Church Spitalfields, whose tall spire rises invisible somewhere in the fog. The bells create a kind of conversation, a call and response across the rooftops, their voices blending and separating, creating harmonies that are somehow both mournful and beautiful, both comforting and unsettling. And beneath the bells, other sounds begin to emerge. The creak of doors opening. The scrape of a shovel against coal, someone feeding a fire, trying to coax warmth back into a cold hearth. The clatter of a milk cart, its wheels rattling over cobblestones, the bottles clinking together with each jolt. The first cries of street vendors, distant and indistinct, selling their wares to whoever might be awake and listening. Footsteps. Many footsteps now. The working day has begun, and the workers are emerging from their cramped rooms and narrow houses, pulling on coats and caps, breathing into cupped hands for warmth, setting out for the docks, the markets, the factories, the warehouses. Their footfalls create a rhythm, not the lone, echoing steps of the hour of the wolf, but a collective sound, a percussion section of labor, of necessity, of survival. The smell of the city changes as it wakes. The coal smoke intensifies as more fires are lit, more chimneys begin their exhalations. There's the scent of bread from the bakeries, yeasty and warm, one of the few pleasant smells in this district. The sharp, acrid tang of lye soap. The organic decay of vegetable matter from the market stalls. And something new this morning, cutting through all the other smells, the smell of printer's ink. Fresh ink. Newspaper ink. The newsboys are beginning their rounds. You can hear them in the distance, their young voices calling out headlines, though you cannot yet make out the words. But you can hear the excitement in their voices, the urgency. Something has happened. Something worth shouting about. Something that will make people part with their pennies to read about it. The sound of a newspaper being unfolded. That particular rustle of paper, stiff paper, the kind that holds ink well, the kind that was expensive enough that people will read every word, will fold it carefully when finished, will perhaps use it later to line drawers or wrap fish. The paper is damp from the fog. It makes a heavier sound than dry paper would, a more substantial sound. And the ink sometimes smears when the paper is this damp, leaving black stains on fingertips, on palms, marks that will last throughout the day. The headlines are forming. In the newspaper offices, men in rolled shirt sleeves are setting type, their fingers flying over the letters, arranging words that will tell the story of Bucks Row to a city that does not yet know it should be afraid. But they are working with incomplete information, with fragments, with rumors. The truth, whatever that might be, is still being assembled, is still being discovered, is still being understood. News traveled differently in 1888. There was no electric hum of information, no invisible networks carrying stories at the speed of light. News moved at the speed of human speech, of human locomotion, of horse-drawn vehicles and hand-operated printing presses. It moved slowly. But it moved. The Whisper Network was the first to carry the story. Long before the newspapers reached most homes, before the official announcements were made, the residents of Whitechapel were learning what had happened in Bucks Row. They learned it the way people have always learned important things in close-knit communities, through conversation, through gossip, through the sharing of information over fences and doorsteps and in the queues at the shops. Did you hear? Something terrible. Bucks Row. A woman. The words pass from mouth to mouth, from neighbor to neighbor, rippling outward from the site of the discovery like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Each telling adds something, subtracts something, changes something. The story mutates as it travels, growing more dramatic or more confused or more frightening depending on who is telling it and who is listening. A woman leans out of her window, sees her neighbor in the street below, calls down in a voice kept deliberately quiet despite the urgent news, "Mary, have you heard? Something dreadful's happened." Down on Bucks Row. In the night. Two men standing outside a pub, smoking, their voices low but intense. They're saying it was murder. Saying it was bad. A shopkeeper, opening his store, pausing to speak with the first customer of the day. Police everywhere this morning. Something's happened. Something that's got them all stirred up. The information spreads through the district like smoke through the fog, slowly, persistently, impossibly to contain. By 7 o'clock, most of Whitechapel knows that something has occurred. By 8, the details, such as they are, have reached even the most isolated corners of the district. By 9, the story has jumped beyond Whitechapel entirely, has begun its journey into the broader consciousness of London. But with the information comes something else. Something less tangible but more pervasive than the words themselves. A feeling. A shift in the psychological weather of the district. A change in the air that has nothing to do with fog or temperature and everything to do with fear. Watch the doors. Watch how they close differently this morning. That door there, on that narrow house with the peeling paint and the cracked window pane, yesterday morning it was left ajar while the family ate their breakfast, letting in what little fresh air might find its way into their cramped room. This morning it is shut tight. Bolted from the inside. The iron bolt sliding home with a decisive click that echoes in the stairwell. That gate there, leading to a small courtyard where children played yesterday evening, it hangs open on rusty hinges, has hung open for weeks, for months, perhaps for years. Nobody bothered to close it. There was no need. But this morning someone has taken the time to swing it shut, to work the stiff latch into place, to make sure it will not swing open again on its own. Locks are being checked. Windows that were left partially open, even a crack, even just enough to let out the stuffiness of too many people sleeping in too small a space, are being pulled tight and fastened. Curtains that were never drawn, because who would bother when there was nothing to hide and nothing worth stealing anyway, are being pulled across windows, blocking out even the dim gray light that filters through the fog. People are looking at each other differently. There is a new quality to the glances exchanged on the street, in the shops, at the market stalls. A wariness. A calculation. The woman you see every morning, who always nods a greeting as you pass, is she looking at you strangely today? Does her expression hold something new? Something suspicious? The man standing on the corner, hands in his pockets, face shadowed by his cap, has he always stood there? Have you seen him before? Or is he new to the neighborhood? And if he is new, why is he here? What is he doing? What is he watching? The realization is spreading through Whitechapel like a cold draft finding its way under every door, through every crack in every wall. The person who did this, whoever they are, whatever they are, is not some outsider, some stranger from a distant place. They are here. In this district. Walking these same streets. Perhaps living in one of these same houses. Perhaps buying bread from the same bakery, drinking in the same pub, passing you on the same narrow lanes. The monster is not in some far-off story, some fairy tale, some legend. The monster is here. Among them. Among us. Invisible in the mist and the crowd. Indistinguishable from any other face in this vast, anonymous city. And that changes everything. The sound of carriage wheels on wet cobblestones. Different from the carts and wagons that have been passing all morning. More refined. More deliberate. The wheels are better made, better maintained. They turn with a smooth, almost musical sound. The horse's hooves have a different rhythm too, steadier, better shod, the gait of an animal that is well cared for, that does not spend its days hauling loads until exhaustion claims it. The carriage stops near Bucks Row. You can hear the creak of the suspension as someone steps down. Hear the murmur of voices, professional voices, educated voices, speaking in tones that expect to be obeyed. These are not working men. These are men of authority, of expertise, of official capacity. A detective, perhaps. A medical examiner. Someone whose job it is to make sense of senselessness, to bring order to chaos, to examine the worst that humanity can do and somehow maintain the professional detachment necessary to function in the face of it. They bring with them a kind of silence. Not the absence of sound, exactly, but a quality of silence that settles over the scene like a blanket. The curious onlookers, and there are always onlookers, people drawn to tragedy like moths to flame, grow quieter. The police constables straighten their postures, become more formal. Even the street vendors seem to lower their voices, to call out their wares with less enthusiasm, as if in the presence of something that demands respect, or at least demands acknowledgement. The professional men move with purpose but without haste. They have done this before, though perhaps never quite like this. They carry leather bags that contain their tools, measuring devices, notebooks, specimen bottles, things that speak to the cold, analytical work of investigation. They speak to each other in low tones, using technical vocabulary that the watching crowd cannot fully understand. There is something almost ritualistic about their movements. The careful examination. The noting of details. The precise measurements and observations. They are creating a record, building a case, assembling the evidence that will be needed later, in court, in reports, in the official histories that will be written about this day. But beneath the professionalism, beneath the detachment, there is something else. You can see it if you watch carefully, the slight hesitation before bending to examine something too closely, the moment when a hand pauses before making a note, the brief flicker of expression that crosses a face before training reasserts control. These are still human beings, after all, confronted with evidence of what one human being can do to another when all restraint, all civilization, all mercy has been stripped away. The fog continues to press down on Bucks Row, on Whitechapel, on all of London. It softens the edges of the scene, makes everything feel distant and dreamlike and somehow unreal. But the investigation is very real. The evidence is very real. And somewhere in this grey morning, in this fog-wrapped city, the person responsible for all of this is also very real. Walking the same streets. Breathing the same air. Perhaps watching from the shadows even now, as the professionals go about their work. But you are far from here. Far from Bucks Row, far from Whitechapel, far from 1888. You are safe. You are warm. You are lying in the darkness of your own room, in your own time, listening to a voice tell you stories about a world that no longer exists except in memory and in words. The fog cannot reach you. The cold cannot touch you. The fear that gripped Whitechapel on that grey morning in August is separated from you by more than a century of time, by thousands of miles of distance, by the impenetrable barrier between then and now, between there and here. Let your breathing continue its slow, steady rhythm. Feel the weight of your blankets. Feel the softness of your pillow. Feel the absolute safety of this moment, this space, this sanctuary. The investigation in Bucks Row will continue. The story will unfold. The autumn of 1888 will move forward toward its dark conclusion. But for you, for now, there is only rest. Only peace. Only the gentle drift towards sleep or the quiet stillness of restful waking. The grey dawn has come to Victorian London. The city has begun another day of its endless days, carrying its new burden of knowledge, its new awareness of darkness. The fog has changed from black to grey, and will change again before the day is done, perhaps to white, perhaps to a lighter shade of grey, perhaps back to black when evening comes again. But the mystery remains. Shrouded. Hidden. Waiting. And we will be here, together, to follow where it leads. In time. When you are ready. When the darkness feels like comfort rather than threat, when the mystery feels like an invitation rather than a warning. For now, rest. The fog remembers everything. And so shall we. Somewhere in the city, in an office lit by a single gas lamp, its flame burning low and steady, a letter is being opened. The paper is cheap, the kind anyone might buy. The handwriting is careful, deliberate, written with a steel-nibbed pen dipped in black ink. You can imagine the sound, the soft scratch of metal on paper, the slight pause at the end of each word as the writer considers the next, the rhythmic nature of it, like a heartbeat, like breathing, like some ancient ritual being performed in silence. The ink takes a moment to dry. In the lamplight, it appears almost wet still, glistening faintly on the surface of the paper. The words it forms are simple. Direct. And they will echo through history with a resonance that their anonymous author could not possibly have imagined. Dear Boss. It begins. And then, further down, pressed into the cheap paper with that scratching pen, a name. Not the name of the writer, that remains hidden, perhaps forever. But a name for the shadow that has fallen across Whitechapel. A name that attempts to give form to the formless, identity to the unknown, presence to what exists only as absence, as gaps in the narrative, as questions with no answers. Jack the Ripper. 3 simple words. A common first name. A verb transformed into a noun, into an identity. Together they create something that transcends the individual words themselves. They create a legend. A ghost. A figure that will walk through the fog of 1888 forever, eternally preserved in that grey autumn light, never aging, never changing, never revealing the human face that surely must have existed beneath the name. The letter arrives at the Central News Agency. It is read. Discussed. Dismissed by some as a hoax, treated seriously by others. It is copied. Distributed. Published. And the name takes flight. It spreads through London faster than any whisper network could carry it. It appears in newspapers. It is spoken in pubs and on street corners. It becomes the word that everyone uses, the shorthand for something too complex and too terrible to otherwise articulate. And in becoming a name, in becoming a legend, the person, whoever they were, whatever they were, dissolves into the fog itself. Becomes inseparable from it. Becomes eternal in the way that only mysteries and stories and unfinished narratives can be eternal. The man or woman behind the name will die someday, of course. Perhaps they died long ago, in some unmarked grave, in some unknown place, their secrets buried with them. But the name lives forever. The name is the fog. The name is the shadow. The name is the question mark that hangs over that autumn in 1888 and refuses, absolutely refuses, to be erased by time or investigation or reason. The autumn deepens. September gives way to October. October edges toward November. The fog does not lift, or if it does, it is only briefly, only long enough for the city to take a breath before it descends again, thicker than before, yellower, more oppressive. The streets of Whitechapel transform. There are more lanterns now, burning at all hours. The residents have purchased them, lit them, hung them outside their doors and windows, creating small beacons of light in the darkness. It is as if the district itself is trying to push back against the shadow, trying to illuminate every corner where danger might lurk, every alley where secrets might hide. Groups of men form patrols, vigilantes, they might be called, though they prefer to think of themselves as protectors. They walk the streets in pairs and in groups, carrying their own lanterns, their own makeshift weapons. Sticks. Clubs. The occasional knife tucked into a belt. They nod to each other as their paths cross in the fog, these self-appointed guardians of the night, united in their determination to reclaim their streets from the shadow that haunts them. But the fog continues. Thick and yellow and silent. It swallows their lantern light, softens their footsteps, muffles their voices. It creates the illusion of safety while providing none. In this fog, you could pass within feet of someone and never know they were there. In this fog, the distance between protection and danger is measured not in yards but in inches, in the thickness of the gray air itself. Look at the streets from above, if you can. Imagine yourself rising up through the fog, higher and higher, until the individual buildings and people and lanterns begin to merge into patterns, into lights reflected in darkness. The cobblestones are wet, always wet, slick with fog moisture and the endless drizzle that seems to fall without ever quite becoming rain. And in that wetness, in those puddles that gather in the hollows and depressions of the ancient stones, the gas lamps are reflected. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Points of yellow light, doubled and tripled by their reflections, spreading across the streets like stars that have fallen from the sky and settled into the mud of London. It is beautiful, in its way. Terrible and beautiful. A city trying to light itself against the darkness, trying to push back the shadows, trying to maintain the fiction that light equals safety, that visibility equals control, that if only they burn enough lamps, hang enough lanterns, patrol enough streets, they can somehow solve the unsolvable, catch the uncatchable, name the unnamed. But some things resist illumination. Some mysteries deepen in the light rather than dissolve. Some shadows grow longer rather than shorter when the lamps are lit. The autumn of 1888 eventually ends, as all autumns must. Winter comes to London. The fog changes character, becomes colder, drier, less yellow and more white. Christmas arrives, then the new year. 1889 begins. Life continues, because life always continues, because people are resilient and cities are eternal and even the darkest mysteries eventually become part of the background, part of the texture of a place, part of its history rather than its present. But the case remains unsolved. Open. Unfinished. The files gather dust in Scotland Yard. The theories multiply. The suspects are investigated and released, an endless parade of possibilities that never quite coalesce into certainty. The identity was never found. Never confirmed. Never revealed. Perhaps it never will be. Perhaps that is the point. Because in remaining unsolved, in remaining mysterious, in remaining eternally suspended in the fog of 1888, the case becomes something more than a case. It becomes a story. A legend. A ghost story told by a dying fire on cold nights, when the fog presses against the windows and the shadows seem deeper than they should be and the past feels very close, just on the other side of memory, just beyond the reach of certainty. The person, whoever they were, has become part of the fog itself. Has dissipated into it, has merged with it, has become inseparable from it. They walk the streets of Whitechapel forever now, not as flesh and blood but as story, as legend, as the eternal question mark hanging in the gray air. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is all we need. Not answers, but the acknowledgement of mystery. Not solutions, but the comfort of knowing that some things remain beyond our grasp, beyond our understanding, beyond our ability to contain and categorize and file away. The fog keeps its secrets. As it always has. As it always will. And now the story we have been telling together, is coming to its close. Not because we have solved anything. Not because we have answered the questions that 1888 posed. But because all stories must end somewhere, must come to rest somewhere, must find their way to a quiet place where they can sleep, where they can dream, where they can wait for the next telling, the next listener, the next voice by the next fire. This place we have created together tonight, this sanctuary built of words and silences and shared imagination, we call it the Cold Case Cradle. It is where these old stories come to rest. Where the mysteries of the past are tucked in like children at bedtime, given their space to exist without being solved, given permission to remain mysterious without being threatening, given the comfort of being remembered without being forced to reveal all their secrets. The cold case cradle rocks gently in the darkness. Back and forth. Back and forth. A rhythm like breathing. A rhythm like waves on a shore. A rhythm like the rain that is beginning to fall now, somewhere in our imaginary London, soft and steady and eternal. The gas lamps are going out, one by one. You can see them if you close your eyes. That lamp on the corner there, its flame gutters, wavers, and goes dark. And then the next one. And the next. Each small point of light winking out, each pool of yellow illumination fading back into shadow, each reflection in the wet pavement dissolving like starlight into velvet darkness. The streets are becoming quiet now. The patrols have returned home. The vigilantes have laid down their sticks and clubs. The lanterns in the windows are being extinguished, one by one, as families settle in for the night, as heads touch pillows, as blankets are pulled up to chins, as the city finally allows itself to rest. Only the rain remains. Soft rain. Gentle rain. The kind of rain that is barely audible, that creates a sound more felt than heard, a presence more than a noise. It falls on the cobblestones, on the rooftops, on the vast sprawl of this ancient city. It washes the streets clean. It dilutes the fog. It gives the night a rhythm, a lullaby, a voice that speaks in whispers too quiet to understand but somehow deeply comforting nonetheless. The fog is dissipating now. Not lifting, it never truly lifts, but thinning, becoming more transparent, allowing shapes to emerge from the gray. Buildings. Trees. The distant spires of churches pointing up toward a sky that is clearing, slowly, gradually, revealing stars beyond the smoke and mist. And in those stars, if you look carefully, if you allow your vision to soften, if you stop trying to see clearly and instead just allow yourself to perceive, there is something eternal. Something unchanging. Something that connected the people of 1888 to us, here, now, in this moment. The same stars they saw. The same patterns. The same distant lights burning in the infinite darkness. We are connected to them by more than curiosity, more than interest in their mysteries and their fears and their lives. We are connected by the simple fact of being human. Of looking up at the night sky and feeling small. Of listening to rain and feeling soothed. Of pulling blankets close and seeking comfort in the darkness. Of telling stories and finding meaning in the telling, regardless of whether those stories have endings or answers or solutions. The story has ended. The book is closed. The fire has burned down to embers that glow soft and red and warm in the darkness, asking nothing, demanding nothing, simply existing as warmth, as light, as comfort. The next hour belongs to you. To the rain, if it is raining where you are. To the silence, if silence is what surrounds you. To your dreams, if sleep comes to claim you. To your thoughts, if wakefulness is your companion. To whatever peace, whatever rest, whatever sanctuary, you can find in this moment, in this bed, in this darkness that holds you gently, that asks nothing of you, that simply allows you to be. The fog of 1888 will always be there, in the stories, in the histories, in the collective memory of a city that never forgets its ghosts. But it cannot reach you. Cannot touch you. Cannot disturb the peace of this moment. You are safe. You are warm. You are exactly where you need to be. Let your breathing slow, if it has not already slowed. Let your body grow heavy, sinking deeper into the mattress, into the pillows, into the perfect weight of blankets that seem to know exactly how to hold you. Let your thoughts drift, like fog, like smoke, like rain falling through darkness, without direction, without purpose, without any destination except the gentle country of sleep. The gas lamps of London have all gone dark now. The streets are silent. The city sleeps. And so, can you. The mystery remains unsolved. The questions remain unanswered. The fog remains eternal. But you do not need to solve anything tonight. You do not need to answer anything. You do not need to understand, or figure out, or make sense of anything at all. Tonight, you only need to rest. May your sleep be deep and dreamless, or filled with the gentlest of dreams. May the darkness be kind to you. May the night wrap around you like velvet, like the softest fabric in existence, holding you, protecting you, giving you permission to let go of everything except this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. May you wake, whenever you wake, refreshed and restored. May the stories we have told stay with you only as faint memories, as distant echoes, as the pleasant residue of time spent in imagination rather than reality. The cold case cradle rocks gently in the darkness. The fog remembers everything. The rain continues to fall. And somewhere in the distance, too far away to matter, too quiet to disturb, the ancient city breathes, and dreams, and keeps its eternal secrets. Rest now. Rest, deeply. Rest, completely. The story is over. The night is yours. And the fog, the beautiful, mysterious, eternal fog, will still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and forever, waiting patiently to share its secrets, or to keep them, as it sees fit. Good night. Sleep well. And may your dreams be gentle.